Hello, welcome to the Let's Talk Kids Health Facebook Live Show, episode 14. I'm Dr. Narissa Bauer, your host. I'm a behavioral pediatrician and blogger of Let's Talk Kids Health. As you know, the concept of the show is to share information about behavioral health and wellness for children and families everywhere. Each week, I plan to bring you topics and guests to help me advance this mission so that we can all talk together. Now, remember, if you're viewing this live, you'll have the opportunity to post comments and ask questions of my guest. Now, let us know you are here anytime by dropping a comment, saying hello, and using the hashtag live. Now, the replay will also be immediately available when we end the broadcast, so feel free to share it with your friends, family, neighbors, whoever you think might benefit. And if you don't want to miss any future episodes, or maybe check out some of my past ones, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Narissa Bauer MD, and follow my blog Facebook page, Let's Talk Kids Health. Now, on to this week's guest. I am happy to welcome Roniqua Zimmermann to the show. She specializes in helping families with kids ages 2 to 12 years of age. She received her Master's of Social Work from Temple University in 2016. She brings over 6 years of experience working with children and families to overcome behavioral, emotional, and mental health struggles. Roniqua has worked in outpatient mental health and school settings, providing individual and family counseling to clients using attachment-based and trauma-informed care approaches. She received training in various therapeutic approaches, including parent-child interaction therapy, or PCIT, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, play therapy techniques, and trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, or TFCBT. Now, I know that was a lot of letters, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry. We're going to define what those are and talk a lot about other things as well. So thank you for joining the show, Roniqua. I'm so happy to have
Thank you
you.
for having me. Thank you.
So if you don't mind, before we actually launch into the questions, do you mind letting some of our viewers know a little bit more about who you are and why you do the work that you do? Like, why is this your passion?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Narissa said, again, I'm Roniqua Zimmermann, and I've been working in the field of providing outpatient services since 2016 when I graduated with my master's. And I've always had a passion of working with kids. Before starting, in mental health, I thought I wanted to be a teacher, or I thought I wanted to be a doctor, but some capacity with working with kids. But I did a lot of work with kids in the schools, providing more of that individual one-on-one time with them, and that's where the passion kind of grew, to kind of be able to provide that more individual service to them, so that way they are allowed to kind of express themselves and discuss, deeper issues they may be struggling with. And so, from there, I've been across a lot of different settings. The school, I've done, community mental health, and now I'm in private practice providing telehealth to families and children, and I am still enjoying it. That's a little bit about me.
Well, thank you so much. And I know that our viewers, our listeners will be so excited to learn more about the role of telehealth and all of these different positive parenting approaches. So without further ado, why don't we get started? Like, what is positive parenting? What does that mean to you?
So positive parenting, just to kind of, I guess, put it briefly, it's really a type of parenting or a type of discipline that kind of keeps the child at the forefront, or in the forefront of your mind. Because what it really does is it really caters attention to the child's needs, and it's very sensitive to the child's needs. It keeps in mind that the child also deserves respect as the adult. A lot of times that can kind of get lost in transaction and kind of thinking that the child does not deserve respect, or they should only listen, follow. And so positive parenting really kind of keeps in mind the child when you're wanting them to kind of do things, or you're interacting with the child. It also creates really healthy bonds between a child and parents, creates very well-balanced children, confident children, things like that. So I really enjoy talking to parents about, the type of parenting approach.
Hmm. Yes, thank you for that. Now, because it's always a good idea when we start a show is just to make sure we're all on the same page of what that means. So I love that
Mhm.
definition that keeping the child at the forefront and really nurturing that relationship between the parents and the child.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, what can parents expect when they are referred to someone for parenting support? I think sometimes there's a lot of stigma around, the need for parenting support or some, a bunch of different feelings around it. Parents may feel like I'm a bad person. I'm not doing what I need to do. And now I need to get help. Oh my gosh, what are people going to
Mhm.
think? So, can you talk about that and also like what to expect?
Yeah, definitely. So, what I like to do when I do have a parent reach out for parenting support is really just meet them where they are, kind of see what's going on, why you're seeking help, and what I can do to help you. And yes, a lot of times I do get parents that kind of come in and there is a little bit of shame or guilt. But I like to walk with the parent through the process. So I do not kind of vow to solve all problems, but I do like to walk with the parent, kind of get more in depth around, the causes of problems, what things are working, what hasn't worked, so that way we can come up with a plan together to address, lingering problems that hasn't been solved. But yes, I definitely, no judgment. There is no one size fits all parenting guide out there. If there is, I haven't seen it. And so we do it together. We figure it out. Each child is different. What works for one family may not work for your family. And so it really takes a really individualized approach to parenting.
Hmm. Yeah, and thank you for that because I often tell families that too. I think that one size fits all is a misnomer. You can't do that, and especially because I think sometimes I see families who, they're very it's not their first child, but the child has a very different
Mm-hmm.
temperament
Mm-hmm.
than the first, or even different from their own temperament, and they're like, wow. I don't understand why he acts this way, right? So there's a lot of questions, a lot of doubt about like what's the best way to do it. And I always know that families want to do the best they can and gain the
Mm-hmm.
confidence. And I love that you are meeting them where they are.
Yep.
So
Yep. Absolutely.
yeah, and what is the typical time frame that parents should expect to work with somebody when they're getting parenting support? I mean, is it possible to sort of give some average on that?
It really kind of depends on the needs and the severity, of the challenges. But I usually tell parents give it about 3 months to, kind of get in, kind of get the problem identified, and then start to use strategies and tips. And then after the 3 months, come back and kind of reevaluate. Okay, is this working? Are we noticing any change or progress at all? If not, do we need to reassess and try something else? So usually I do try to give it these 3 months to kind of feel some type of change before, kind of throwing in a time to say, hey, this isn't working at all.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb. So thank you for sharing that because I think if anybody out there is a general pediatrician or a provider who refers for parenting support, it's helpful to give families, kind of a estimate of what to expect and putting in
Mm-hmm.
that plug that it's something that we're going to refer you to, but expect to spend X amount of time will just be really helpful, I think, in helping set that expectation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, we're living in COVID times, right? And since March of last year, I transitioned fully to telehealth right now. But I know that your business is totally telehealth, right? Now,
Yes.
and you have certainly worked in lots of different environments before going out on your own and setting up your business doing telehealth. So I'm curious from your experience, how does providing parenting support on telehealth differ from in person? And specifically thinking about the parents who are like, is it going to be the same, or like how are
Mm-hmm.
we going to get that experience? How's she going to work with the family? How's that going to look like? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, definitely. I do have families come in asking that, and surprisingly, I don't get it asked as much as I thought I would about the differences between in person and online. But what I do tell families though that are curious about how it all works is so I have come from in person as well, and now I'm doing telehealth. But it really gives a new, unique perspective into what can occur like behind closed doors, maybe in the home, where families are usually, mentioning that's where they're seeing most of their behaviors. And so when I'm providing support over telehealth, I'm able to kind of come inside the home where the child is usually the most comfortable. And when the child is more comfortable, sometimes the behaviors pop up quicker. And when I am able to meet with the families online through telehealth, I can see it and give feedback in the moment and help walk the family through, navigating around any type of behaviors and challenging behaviors that are coming up. So it really does provide this really unique perspective where I can kind of be there when it's happening, versus, the parent kind of come in and bring them in an office after the fact. Now, things can come up in office as well in sessions, but a lot of times it's super helpful for families to know tips and strategies that they can use in their own home, in their own environment as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you speak to a real definite advantage I've noticed too is just getting to see the child and parents in their own environment, which is so helpful, And then almost like a proactive approach, right? I mean, rather than after the fact, like you said, you're able to sort of, if you catch it in that moment, like work with that and use that to kind of put those skills in place. So
yeah. I've also noticed, even things about the environment. So some things you can't see in office, if I'm noticing like the environment is overstimulating, that's something I can, support the parent with and understanding, what can be changed about the environment to be proactive and decrease some of the challenges that can come with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So are parents typically open to that when you spot something?
Yeah. I always let parents know, if I do give tips or if I give support, again, this is me collaborating with you. Yeah. I'm not here to kind of tell you what to do, but I am giving suggestions and you kind of let me know how you feel about that. I always love parents to be open and honest with me. So if there is anything that I am sharing with them and they kind of feel like, this doesn't fit right for me, I don't like this, then I love to have that conversation to chat around any type of resistance and talk about, what do you feel would be the best approach or why I may feel, it's the best approach.
Right. And I guess, could you elaborate a little bit more on is each session usually an hour with you weekly? Like what is the timing and frequency of sessions usually?
Yeah, for parenting support only. So if I'm not meeting with the child, I do offer weekly if it's really severe, the behaviors are really challenging. But if it's not, we can do bi-weekly, and I usually meet with the family for around 45 minutes, and then we meet bi-weekly or weekly.
Mm-hmm. Great. And just as a reminder, if you're watching this live, don't hesitate to drop a comment, let us know you're here, use #live. And then also, if you're going to watch this on replay, make sure you use the #replay, just so that way when we go back through and if we miss any comments or questions, that'll help let us kind of flag those quickly so that we can make sure to answer your questions, because we do want the show to be a collaborative discussion with everybody who's watching. All right. So now, really quickly, I was going to ask you, do you mind sharing your 3 top tips for helping kids who have those big emotions? I mean, we're seeing a lot of those nowadays, right? Even more so with the pandemic. What are your top 3 things that you find yourself talking to with families a lot?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the 3 top, I found it a little hard to kind of scale it down to 3, but really the most important, number one thing I always recommend to families is just to remain calm. So if your child is really engaging in, really big emotions, there's a lot of crying, screaming, yelling, the number one thing you want to do is remain calm as the parent or as the caregiver, because it's really not helpful if both the parent and the child are both escalated. Mm-hmm. And this can be challenging for, parents or adults in the moment, as well as the child, because sometimes parents also get triggered by big emotions coming from the child. And so what I do recommend to parents is to just take a step back if it's really hard to remain calm in the moment. it's a really great idea to kind of model for the child and say, hey, I feel like I'm too upset right now. I'm just going to take a break right now to, calm down. And you can just walk away, regroup yourself, take a deep breath, and get yourself calm before coming back to assist in that moment. But that's super important, is to remain calm, because the overall goal would be or should be to de-escalate. So that's number one. My second tip would be to make sure you're providing validation or reflecting on the child's feelings when that's happening. Sometimes kids really feel as if they're not being heard, or they're being ignored, and a lot of the big emotion can kind of attribute to that. And so if you are kind of validating what's going on, saying things such as, I noticed, you got really upset when I told you had to wait until after dinner in order to have your dessert. I know that seems tough. You really love, the cookie or whatever it is that they're wanting. But just validate that and reflect on that, because what it does for the child is it lets them know that, okay, mom, dad, or whomever heard me, they're not ignoring me. And yes, they understand why I'm feeling so yucky right now. And that it's very helpful for de-escalating the child when they're feeling a lot of intense emotions. So definitely validating. And then the last thing that I would say is a big top three is you want to avoid using that moment to reason with the child or to teach a lesson. A lot of times parents can use this opportunity, or want to try to use this opportunity, to say, aha, this is exactly what happens. This is what I'm talking about. Let's talk about why this is wrong, what we should do next time, and how to prevent this in that moment. Now, I'm not saying never have that conversation, but when there are a lot of big emotions, the child is escalated, you want to avoid any reasoning in this time, because usually the child is not able to receive it in that type of space anyway. And so it's really not going to be effective. So your overall goal when there is escalation is just to de-escalate, avoid that reasoning, and save that for later when everyone is calm and in a space where they're able to hear and reason.
I love those three tips. Those would have been my three top ones too. Like, for families who are sitting and listening, watching this, and they're like, I just, in the moment, it's so hard. It's so hard to remember those. I mean, how deeply do you work with a family or a parent to identify, like, they just they're struggling with regulating themselves? I mean, is there anything else that you could suggest for that parent who whose tendency may be to yell, and they try really hard to stay calm or bite their tongue, but like the child's explosiveness, or just how often it happens, just creates this like, I can't believe this is happening again. Do you have any other words of advice for families who find themselves in that predicament time and time again?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, obviously, continue practicing remaining calm, and also try to identify what it is that's triggering you as, the parent. Because there could be certain things that, maybe the tone of voice, maybe just being told no, maybe it's a respect thing. So really try to identify what that trigger is for you, and once you know that, you can be proactive in managing your own emotions when it comes up. So if if your child, tells you no, that's a trigger for you, you can have a backup plan of how to handle that when it happens. So that way you're not getting escalated. Also kind of recognizing yourself what trigger it looks like. Because trigger could be in a word that's like thrown out, and sometimes people are wondering, okay, what does that mean? How do I know if I am triggered? So, if you're noticing you are also raising your voice, or your nerves, your heart is starting to beat fast, you're getting really hot, things like that are warning signs that, yes, you are getting triggered and you are also escalating. And so recognizing that in yourself, know that when they're starting to pop up for you is when you want to take that time to kind of step back. But even, if you've tried them all and it's still super, super hard for you to regulate your own emotions in those situations, I do also recommend parents seek their own support, from maybe even a therapist, their own counselor, to work on their own individual escalation of their own body, because that can be helpful. It can be tough, managing a lot of stress from escalations for just one child, and also all of your day-to-day things that you have to do as a parent. So it can be tough. And so I always tell families to take care of themselves. Parents take care of themselves and use self-care, and seeking your own counselor therapist is another way to practice self-care for yourself as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's really important to note. And, sometimes recognizing that what those triggers are for the parent and taking the time to sort of work on their own mental health, self-care is the first step even sometimes to that. Now, before we head over to questions or comments, I do want to ask, because at the beginning when I was introducing you and we threw out a whole bunch of alphabet letters, could you briefly walk us through what those are, very briefly? Because I know that, people might have heard of PCIT or CBT, or they get, what is the difference, or how do I know who to go to for these things? Is there one that's better than the other? So I guess, can we start with PCIT? Could you give us a brief description of what that is?
Yeah, so PCIT stands for Parent-Child Interaction Therapy. And it's a therapy, or I would say family-based therapy, where the parent and the child meets with a therapist to work on a few different things. It addresses attachment in a relationship with the parent and child, and it also addresses big emotions. It's usually recommended for kids between the ages of 2.5 to 7 years old, but you can use it for kids a little bit older. But what it does is it really works with the parent to be able to regulate the child's emotions, but to be able to address the emotions when they're happening in the moment. I really like to recommend PCIT to families that are struggling with big emotions, because it's like a coaching program where the parent has headphones in their ears, so I call it the bug in the ear, and I'm speaking directly to the parent, and it's play-based. So the parent and the child are playing together, and then the therapist will be talking to the parent and teaching different skills and strategies to use as they play to help manage the child's behavior. Really super effective, with commitment from the family, is really super effective and help, and it equips the parent with skills to be able to regulate their child and settle them when they're de-escalated. It also helps with setting limits and consistency, which can be a challenge sometimes as well. So it really kind of walks through, how to do that, what's the best way to do that, and how to respond when it's not going so well.
Right.
So yes, that's parent-child interaction therapy.
Great. Thank you so much. And what's the standard length? Because that is a evidence-based program, meaning that it's been tested in lots of different environments, and there's a protocol typically that you follow. Just for our listeners who are listening or watching this, can you give them an idea of what, again, the length of time that typically is?
Yeah, so PCIT is usually, if you're attending weekly, it's between 12 to 20 sessions of, parent-child play therapy. And so there are two phases. There's the first phase that really focuses on that attachment and rebuilding that relationship, because a lot of times the relationship between the parent and child can be a little strained if they're experiencing a lot of conflict, a lot of big emotions, tantrums, meltdowns, things like that. So that first part really helps to enhance that bond and repair those relationships. And then the second part, once you kind of graduate from that first part and that the relationship is really secure, you then start to focus more on, setting effective disciplining and being consistent and giving, commands and things like that. So overall, to complete both phases is usually around 12 to 20 sessions.
And again, remember, I know that you said that there's a bug in the ear, and typically it's in person, but I know that they've adapted it now for telehealth, right?
Yeah. I believe it was already adapted before, COVID and the whole telehealth blow up. But it's super, super effective over telehealth, if not more helpful, than in office, because again, you're in the home. And so you kind of set all this up in the home, and it's really helpful for parents to be able to have this in-home support, with it being
Yeah,
video.
yeah, that's great. I was excited to have you talk about that because, again, for all those advantages that you said, I mean, it really seems to work well in that situation. Now, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Can you speak a little bit about what that is and when you would use it?
Yeah, so cognitive behavioral therapy is a brief type of therapy to use, which addresses thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and how they're all connected. Usually, CBT is used with kiddos and even also adults experiencing, anxiety, depression. It can also be used for ADHD. But yes, it's really addressing, how a child's thoughts, how what they may be thinking affects their behaviors, and because it affects their behaviors, how it affects their mood. So, for example, if a child kind of wakes up in the morning, maybe they didn't get a lot of sleep, and so they may think, oh, I'm super tired, I'm not going to have a good day. Because they're thinking that, they may start to feel, drowsy, they may start to feel unmotivated. And because they feel like that, they may behave in a way associated with that, maybe not getting dressed fast enough or being extra irritable with other friends, with adults. And so all of that is connected. And so CBT really likes to kind of go in and make that known to the child and also the parent about how they're all connected and how to kind of interrupt that cycle. So that way, one thought is not really affecting the rest of the day for the child and the parent.
Mm-hmm. And in that context, Roniqua, can you speak to, like, it sounds like that's much more client based. So like if it's the child who's
Mm-hmm.
undergoing that, it's mostly with the child. But because, we're all pediatric specialists, obviously kids don't live in a vacuum. So is there
Mm-hmm.
parent components then when you work with a child doing this then?
Yeah, I do like to bring the parents in. I like to keep the parents informed. But whatever new concept the child is learning, I do like to teach it to the parent, and then also have exercises with the parent and child so they can kind of go through them together. I do like for the parents to also model some of the concepts so that way the child can see it being done in the home and then repeat what they're seeing their parents are doing. So yes, I do like to keep families involved with that process, although a lot of the work is done with the individual child.
Mm-hmm. Now that's CBT. Now you also were trained in trauma-focused CBT. So what is that additional two letters add to that, and how does
Yeah.
that differ?
Yeah, so trauma focus, it's still, we're looking at CBT, but because we have the TF, so the trauma focus in front of that, this one is looking more at kiddos who have experienced some type of extreme stressor or what's called trauma. And stresses can be anything. It really kind of depends on how the child reacts to that situation. So some common stressors could be, going through a divorce, being in a really bad car accident, different types of abuse, all types of things that kind of really stresses the child out, and can cause a shift in their behavior. And so trauma-focused CBT really addresses the traumatic event that happened, and how that can start to kind of come out in the child when they're interacting in everyday situations. So certain triggers may bring up negative thoughts for them. They may be having nightmares, flashbacks, things like that. And so we still use the same CBT approach, but we're also the entire treatment phase. We're focused on the trauma and desensitizing the child to their reaction to that trauma, so that way they're able to cope and handle when they do feel triggered or reminded of the trauma.
Right. Now, I assume that because you're dealing specifically through that trauma-focused lens, that potentially that could add more length of time to
Mm-hmm.
therapy, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it can be longer, depending on if it's just a one trauma event, one trauma experience, or if there are multiple traumas, then it can take even longer depending on, what the situation is. But yes, it takes some time. It's definitely not a process to be rushed. So it really takes some time for the child to even get comfortable, with the setup of therapy, and then be able to feel ready to even start to talk about whatever that event was.
Right. So I'm going to ask a question just because I know that there are families out there who are like, okay, we have just had a whole year of online school. I'm not sure if my child will engage in this format. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what do you have to tell families who are maybe exploring or thinking about whether this might be good because of access? Like, it's easy. You don't have to
Yeah.
drive anywhere to get to you, or providers who do this type of work, but they're
Mm-hmm.
concerned about the ability of their child to do this in front of a screen just after 6 hours of doing screens for school.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so what I tell parents is, their online therapy is different from their e-learning that they're doing, and we want to make sure we're keeping it separate. And so what I like to do, and I tell kids this too when they're first meeting me, is I step into their world, I meet them at their level. I do not require kids to sit in a chair and a desk to have sessions with me. I really don't have a lot of rules. I like them to be as comfortable as possible. So if they're wanting to lie down, if that's most comfortable to them, that's fine. If they're wanting to sit on the floor, we can sit up on the floor. I'm fine with whatever makes them comfortable to help them to be able to engage. As long as they're engaged, it's absolutely fine. And so that kind of in itself creates the difference in their therapy sessions versus their school sessions. It's not like a rigid place where you have a lot of rules and expectations in that aspect. And then I do also have the families create what I call like a container, which holds a lot of their therapeutic things. Like it could be different props. There's different toys, stuffed animals, just things they feel would be helpful and supportive to them in sessions. Just kind of keep it in a container or a box that we only pull out when it's time for session. Because what this does is it starts to create that therapeutic space and environment once it's time to start the session. So once they pull out their box, they know, hey, it's time for therapy, which is again different from their e-learning. And so, I do like to just really keep that different so that way they're not feeling as if maybe it's like a chore or a task. And again, as I meet them where they are. So if they come to session and they just don't want to talk, they want to play, that's fine with me. Children communicate a lot through play. And so we can just play. And that's fine. And it also helps, remove a lot of the stress that the kids are experiencing with the pandemic and shifting between e-learning and in person. And if they're kind of going back and forth, just allowing them that safe space just to be. So it's really, I really don't have a lot of boundaries and rules, unless there's an issue with engagement. I have not run into that so far. Usually, if there is resistance, the child is able to talk about it briefly, and then we play, and it helps to de-stress that way.
Yeah. And then lastly, you also said that you are trained in play-based therapies. So just again, so that we're all clear on what that means, do you mind just giving us a brief description of that so that viewers who might have heard of it, but they're like, is that even therapy? Like, that's what I hear a lot. Like, all they did was play. I wasn't sure if he was getting anything out of that. So
yeah. I do like to explain that when I am first meeting with families, if they're wanting, play-based type therapy approaches, that yes, a lot of it will look like the child just played. And I do like to let parents know that there is a process to therapy. There's a process to, the play aspects of therapy.
Right.
And for kiddos, younger kids, even teenagers, play is a very powerful way that they communicate. So it's really hard for them to kind of put in words the way adults do, their thoughts, feelings, their actions, and they learn the best through play. And so, yes, I will come into the child's world if they like to play. Roblox is a big thing. We'll jump on Roblox and we'll kind of get into their world. And you can see a lot of things that the child could be struggling with, or a lot of their insecurities, if you just kind of watch what they're interested in and what they're playing with. And it's through that medium that I'm able to, you know, connect with the child and then help them to process a lot of their stressors and, you know, cope with a lot of things and find different coping strategies to deal with a lot of their stressors. But yes, I do not just play with the child only, although it looks like that. And the child really enjoys it. They respond best that way. But yes, there is a purpose. And for the parents, I do like to process with them afterwards, so that way they kind of understand the process. So I tend to do 10, 15-minute meetings at the end of sessions with parents to give them an update about what happened, you know, if there was a theme that came out in the play, what I noticed, and how they can support throughout the week.
Right. That's great. Thank you so much for going through that. Now, I do want to say we did get a comment from one of my past guests, Dr. Slama McManus. She said, great tips. Agree. A calm parent welcomes a calm child. So hard when you are stretched thin as a parent. Loving this podcast, this show. Thank you, Kelly, for sharing that. Yeah, so I guess since we're coming close to the end of our time today, now for listeners, viewers of the show, if they are interested in working with you and or just, you know, looking for someone who can do this, but through telehealth or just, you know, parenting support in general, because there's not a lot of us out there, you know, especially now, like where can they go to find you?
Yeah, so I have a few different ways that you can find me. I do have a website. It's www.childtherapylab.com. And so on my website, you can book a free consultation. So I do offer consultations to kind of meet with you. You meet me and we chat briefly about what's going on, and I can share with you how I may be able to help. So that's one way. You can also email me at childtherapylab@gmail.com. And I can get back to you that way. Just kind of email me, you know, what's going on and what you're looking for. And you can also reach me by phone. Phone number is 317-662-4403. And I usually get back to families as soon as I can, but I will say the best way to reach me would be through email. Because when I'm in between sessions, sometimes it's really hard to return phone calls. But yes, you are welcome to call, email, or you can also reach out through my website.
Wonderful. And for those of you who are interested in connecting with Roniqua, I will also include her information in the show notes. So it'll be available either in the description of the YouTube video as you know, for future reference. So thank you so much for spending your time, sharing your expertise, and clearly sharing what you love with those who are watching today. And just for those of you watching now, if you have any suggestions for future topics or guests, please feel free to reach out to me at letstalkkidshealth@gmail.com or drop me a comment below or message on social media. And I do want to point out that my guest for next week is Dr. Amy Shriver. She'll be talking about the pandemic mental health crisis, how pediatricians can support child and teen well-being. Now, her episode will be on Friday, April 30th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And I did hint at the fact that in June, my show will be always on Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So that way there's no need to kind of wonder, when is it going to be? That's going to be starting in June. But I hope you guys will tune in for next week's show. Thank you again so much. It's been such a joy talking to you, Roniqua. And I know that you're going to continue to help so many families during this time. And remember, if you want to, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. And you can also sign up for alerts so that way you always know who's going to be on my guest week to week. Thanks again.